Chapter 9. It seemed like barely any time had passed at all when her crew was finally back to their proper selves, and Captain Bonnie Red found herself standing in the docking bay of the human ship, watching hers and the human shuttles go back and forth. Hers zipped back and forth to the unfortunate Kabakian ship, while the human warship's shuttles brought some urgent supplies to the Red Spark. Beside her, Captain Archer seemed quiet, and if he had had a tail, Bonnie suspected it might have drooped and even curled. "They're almost done," he said while the last of the little transport shuttles left his ship and began to head towards her own. "Mine are also," Bonnie answered, their hands folded behind their back as they stood in silence before she finally broke it. The Kambakian ship never had a chance. From where they stood in the shielded deck, they could clearly see the vessel was a patchwork of holes. Their ships are notoriously slow, have minimum shielding, and not much for defense. All they really have going for them is thick armor and a lot of cargo space. She wasn't wrong. The fighter was little more than a big ball of metal. It was gyroscopically stable, which was a plus, and its rotating outer hull distributed damage. However, that was not enough to keep any cutters at bay. And now it was a patchwork of holes in the vacuum of space, and the gel-like bodies of Kabaki aliens floated aimlessly nearby. "A pity they weren't repaired for a real fight. My scans show they barely had basic plasma blasters, and almost no torpedoes," Captain Archer remarked. "That's how it goes. They probably went into their hibernation cycle, and were counting on hiding in the belt to save them. Prey species are rarely combative, and their technology reflects that," Bonnie explained, and Reginald gave her a double take. Bonnie saw the way he looked her up and down, as if seeing her again for the first time, and took a guess. "The Lamison Military Academy. Scout subspecialization. We had to learn about how other species did things, because we were out on our own most of the time." "I should have figured," Reginald said, with a crooked little smile. "What made you go this route? You know, a merchant sailor." "Casualty rates for scouts are 60%. We go into the most dangerous areas in search of new worlds, new resources. It did get us away from the rigid ways of the home world, but all we do is take orders and die. We went out to a world our astronomers said might be habitable. We made first contact with another species that we found living there." Bonnie closed both of her eyes and her jaw, and Reginald's voice became quieter than she knew he could speak. "Things went bad?" he asked. 50% casualties in an hour. They pretended they were interested in friendly contact and trade, but all they wanted to trade was blaster fire. Bonnie's lips curled into a snarl that bared her vicious teeth. "They were a predator species that worked by ambush. They fooled us." "How'd you get out?" Reginald asked with a mix of sympathy and professional curiosity. "Atmospheric skip. They fired on our shuttle while we were still in the atmosphere. I ordered them to maximum output, and we skipped along the surface and used it to launch ourselves back out of reach of their cannons." Bonnie's low growl came from deep in her throat. "Risky," he said with a whistle. "So is incoming fire." Bonnie let out a derisive sneeze. "Of course we had the ship descend into range for a quicker pickup, and they returned fire. We did an atmospheric skip straight into the docking bay, and wrecked the surviving shuttles, and the docking bay." "So that made you quit? Taking that many casualties?" Reginald asked. "I can understand that." "No," Bonnie answered, and her growl returned. "We reported it back to Lamasa, along with our casualty list. Their response was why we quit." "What? Did they accept an apology and just do nothing?" Reginald inquired, picturing the easy convenience of politicians across what felt like every world. "No. They did send a military response, and turned that planet's capital city into glass. But when they communicated with me, they said not to bother with specific casualty names for the next few years, as the budget just wasn't there for memorial modifications." When Reginald sucked in his teeth, Bonnie guessed he understood and nodded. "Aye. In that pirate sim, they showed some old cults of your world that saw ways to become immortal after death. The Lamisons do not have that. Our immortality comes from our accomplishments, what we achieve. They essentially condemned us to an eternity of obscurity. We are oddities in our species, but we're still the Lamison. And somewhere along the way, they forgot that." I resigned. So did most of my crew. And we traded our pensions and accumulative pay to the government in exchange for... She gestured to the red spark that floated out by the ruined freighter. That. They were going to scrap it anyways, after the damage it took from the atmosphere. What was left of my crew and I spent months retrofitting it. We plundered a few of that planet's outer satellites and unmanned probes. And we've been making our way ever since. Very piratey, Reginald answered. They were my crew. I got half of them killed, and they wouldn't even get a memorial for it. No, and that planet owed us some compensation. We've been trading our way ever since, picking up a few other outliers every now and then. And then here we are, she said, and turned to face him as they watched the last shuttles depart their respective pickup and delivery points. Well, you got at least one... Nah, a whole ship full of friends out in the void now. And I hope you enjoy a little extra of what I had delivered to your ship. If you're ever in Louisville, look me up. And if I'm back there again, we'll have drinks, he said, and faced her in turn, with one hand folded behind his back and extended the other to his counterpart. She clasped it firmly. I don't know why I told you all of that, but for some reason it felt good to say. Friend, I'll take you up on that. I would say the same to you of my homeworld, but I will never go back. But if ever your ship is in distress where I can assist, call for the red spark, and we'll light the void on fire together. I would consider it an honor, Captain Bonnie Red. Safe travels, he said as her shuttle came into dock. Earth may be closed to you for now, but when it isn't, pay us a visit. I plan to, Bonnie replied, and after releasing the warmth of his hand with the greatest of reluctance, she let hers fall back to her side and walked away while the long curved shuttle ramp lowered to the floor of the deck. Her footfalls echoed in her ears like blaster fire when she walked up the ramp into the ship, the last of her crew to leave the human vessel. The engines roared to life as it closed her off from the humans. The shuttle backed out while she took her seat, and the pilot guided them back the way they came. The propulsion lights flared their warnings along the side, and then, spared the feeling of the alert from the inertial transfer device, they shot out like a torpedo from their position and back towards their now repaired deep space home of metal. When back on board the Red Spark, Bonnie left the shuttle in silence and walked in silence toward the bridge. Along the way, her logistics and supply officer fell into her side. Captain, what did they call you? She asked her supply officer before he could get another word out. He only needed a moment to think about it. He was slurring a bit, but I think he said, Oberon. A ship officer of an old show involving a trek across the stars, where they constantly pulled miracles out of their rectum. Alright then, Oberon, pull a miracle out of your rectum and tell me what we've got, she asked, and he handed her his datapad. Our ship is repaired enough to get to a dock for long-term repairs and safety. And between the salvage we'll get from the dead ship and the goods they had on board, we'll be able to pay for storage, refitting, upgrading weapons, shields, and maybe even armor with a tiny sum to spare. It'll just take a few months, and we can travel the void again, Oberon answered, while she flipped through the inventory. Bonnie's tail wagged. Excellent, she said. We'll cut the cost by having the crew work in shifts to help with the refitting. As you wish, Captain, He stopped before he could say her name. She'd raised a hand. No, don't say it. From now on, call me... Her tail wagged much, much faster. Call me Captain Bonnie Red. At your command, Captain Bonnie, he said with more enthusiasm than she expected.